Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Standpoint. Now, some economists and policy analysts have expressed concern about the recent actions taken by the Central Bank of Nigeria concerning the benchmark interest rate and other monetary policy matters in the country. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria increased the benchmark interest rate to 22.75% on Tuesday as part of the move to aggressively manage the country's inflationary pressures. Olayemi Kadoso, the governor of the CBN, disclosed that the MPC voted to keep the cash reserve ratio at 45%, while the liquidity ratio was retained at 30%.
The committee decided to further tighten monetary policy as follows. 1. Raise the MPR by 400 basis points to 22.75 from 18.75%. We are moving to a very aggressive regulatory environment. We are moving to a very aggressive regulatory environment where those policies have been coming out, as you can see, and tolerance for people not to abide by the regulations that are coming out and to comply is zero. People will have to abide by those regulations, and those that do not will face the consequences for not doing so.
CBN Governor Yemi Kadoso speaking there. But now, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, the country's annual inflation rate jumps to 29.90% in January, and that's from 28.92% in December 2023, primarily fueled by a continuous surge in food prices. The decision by CBN seems to be aimed at countering persistent inflationary pressures and addressing exchange rate volatility. Two gentlemen who are key players in the economic sector. We only have one of them now. We'll just speak with him. He joins me live on the program to analyze how this recent monetary policy thrust will affect the economy. We're joined by Professor of Finance and Capital Markets at the Nasarawa State University, Uche Nwaleke. He joins me via Zoom. Good to have you join us, Prof.
Yeah, thanks so much, Precious. I'm actually live on your studio in Abuja.
Oh, thank you so much, Prof, for joining us live in the studio. I thought you were joining via Zoom. Thank you for joining us, in the studio. But, Prof, let me ask you, because we're seeing several reactions from economists and financial analysts about this recent move and decision by the CBN. What's your thought on it, the decisions from that last meeting?
Well, the MPC took a decision to further tighten monetary policy using the monetary policy rate. Just as you noted, monetary policy rate was increased by as much as 400 basis points. The cash reserve requirement was also increased from 32.5 to 45%. The asymmetric corridor around the MPR was further widened. It was only the liquidity ratio that was retained at 30%. Well, it's not difficult to see why the MPC took that route, chose to tighten monetary policy. By the way, it was expected that there was going to be further tightening of monetary policy. The MPC mixed two of its meetings in 2023. In September and in November, there was no meeting. So this first meeting of the year was expected to be, if you like, hawkish in terms of policy stance. And I was saying it's not difficult to see why. You see, inflation rate is rising. Has remained elevated. 29.9% is quite high. The target for this year is 21.4%. The central bank has a long-run inflation target band of 6 to 9%. So at 29.9%, that's way high, higher than that target. Then you also have the issue of exchange rate. There's a pressure on exchange rate. Central bank thinks much of the pressure is, demand driven. And then there is also the fact that rate of return in the economy today is negative. Once inflation rate is ahead of interest rate, you have negative rate of return, and that doesn't encourage or incentivize inflows of particularly foreign investment. So you need to have positive rate of return to be able to encourage investment. So I think these are some of the factors at the back of the minds of the MPC members when they took the decision to hike. Now, having provided that context, the other thing to note is that the economy, when you talk about the economic policy, you are talking about essentially policies that are geared towards improving the people's welfare. All right, that's why even in our constitution, what you find there is that the primary essence of governance is security and welfare. And that welfare, economic goals to attain that welfare usually are pursued using policies, using fiscal policies, using monetary policies. Now, macroeconomic goals are those goals that seek to either achieve low, stable inflation rate, sustainable growth, GDP growth, and lower unemployment rate. So the point I'm making is that these goals must work together. So when you are taking policies, making decisions, monetary policies, you should also have at the back of your mind or have an eye on the other policies too that help to achieve the one single goal of economic policy, which is people's welfare. So the point I'm making is that yes, there was need to tighten, but the size of the tightening, the speed of the tightening, the level of the tightening, the magnitude, in my view, was way too high. I am of the opinion that the MPC shouldn't have done that, done as much as 400 basis points.
And that's where I want to really speak. Apologies, Prof, for coming in. That's why I really want to speak to you on. First of all, I know you are a figures man, but for a lot of people, economics and finance can be very technical for them to understand. So I would like us to break it down as much as possible for every Nigerian to understand. When you look at this decision by the CBN, or the MPC rather, do you think that it took into consideration, and that's what you were speaking to, the peculiarities of our economic environment, whether it's the informal sector or the SMEs? I want you to speak to that as well.
Yes, that's I was actually headed in that direction. Just to let you know that the economic policies, as I said, should work towards achieving a particular goal. And what is that ultimate goal? Ultimate goal is people's welfare. Okay. Now, what the MPC did was to increase monetary policy rate by as much as 4%. Okay. Now, monetary policy rate used to be 18.75, and they increased it to 22.75. Now, it is that rate at which the central bank lends to commercial banks. So, central bank attempts to use that rate to anchor the interest rates in an economy, but particularly targeting short-term, interest rates. So the higher the rate, the monetary policy rate, which is the rate at which they lend to banks, banks, of course, in turn will relend, and when the banks are also lending, they will tend to increase their own, lending rate. So the higher the MPR, the higher the lending rate. And when lending rates are high in an economy, what do you find? Access to credit becomes a lot difficult. Those who have borrowed, it becomes difficult for them to service whatever loans they have taken from banks. And when you have a high interest rate environment, it doesn't help business growth. So, and that's the angle I'm making. The point I was making. And MPC didn't just stop at increasing that rate, which I told you is the benchmark interest rate. They also increased the cash reserve requirement for banks. Okay, what is this cash reserve requirement? Every bank is expected statutorily to deposit a certain percentage of their deposit with the central bank. So the higher this rate, okay, the more difficult it is for banks to, of course, have funds to make credit in an economy. It used to be 32.5%. Now it's 45%. What it means is that for every 1 naira deposit, banks are now expected to deposit 45 kobo of that, with the central bank. And such deposits are not remunerated by the central bank. The central bank doesn't reward, as it were, banks for doing that. You also take into cognizance the fact that there's a liquidity ratio of 30%. So by the time you consider all that is not available, to give out as loans, so that space is being, narrowed. And central bank is doing that because it says there is too much money in the circulation. So one way to remove that money is also to make it difficult for banks to give out money. So that's what is happening. And I'm saying that while this may be an approach to follow, the manner in which we also do that is important. It's not, it will be in the interest of a growing economy, for example, to tighten monetary policy in an abrupt manner, because that's the way I say it. Tightening should be done gradually. It should be done incrementally, such that the adverse effect on productivity, the adverse effect on growth generally is not, it's not significant. So if I were a member of the NPC, I would have voted to at least retain the cash reserve requirement at 2.5%, because already that rate is one of the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. So they have taken it again to 45%. That's I think is killing for banks, and I wouldn't be surprised if
Prof, some economists have said that, look, this is almost seemed like a panic move. But in terms of the improvement that we're looking to make with the economy, and then the signal that it sends to investors, because the president has been looking to bring in investors, is right now in Qatar trying to do that. What signal does this send, and where does this leave us?
Well, I don't know whether you've seen the financials of some companies lately. I have looked at them, and if you notice, many of these companies, apart from reporting huge Forex losses, okay, if you check the financials, a huge chunk is also coming by way of finance costs. So the cost of servicing, the money they have borrowed, even from our local banks here. Okay, so when cost of capital is as high as, for banks is very high, the cost of borrowing in some cases as high as 30%. Okay, so you can imagine the kind of impact it has on the economy. And by the way, when you have, even rising cost of production, okay, the natural thing for firms to do will be to pass them on to the final consumer. So in a way too, it also helps to fuel the inflation that you are out to contain. So I think high interest rates, well, it depends on how you look at it. There are people that say if interest rates are high, it has a way of bringing in attracting investors, particularly if interest rates are low in those economies. So we need to increase our own to be able to attract them to come and invest here. All right. So that's one way to look at it. But again, it is not only interest rates that an investor in Qatar is looking at to come to Nigeria to invest. It's looking at a whole lot of factors, including the stability in Forex, ability to repatriate funds, security situation in the country, even the overall business environment, tax environment, and so on. These are factors the businessman will be considering, not just the interest rate. So for us to say we need to jack up interest rates to be able to attract them, that may not really follow. If you look at our capital importation reports, that of the National Bureau of Statistics, over the last even few quarters, you will find that foreign direct investment, have actually been plummeting, despite the fact that at least even before now, we have had some attempts by the central bank to also increase the MPR. So that didn't really translate into increase in foreign direct investment, because for me that's the one that matters. It's not about foreign portfolio investment, which again is what the central bank may be trying to influence. Foreign portfolio is when they now come and then they end up buying our treasury bills. Treasury bills today, CBN is issuing them at 19%. The other day, of course, this one is OMO. OMO is purely central bank's liquidity instrument. But the OMO bills, I just read 21.5%. That's quite high. So, but the treasury bill, the one that investors can take, okay, the last one as high as 19% for 360 treasury bill, is all in an attempt to make it more attractive to them to invest. But again, what sort of capital comes in via investment in treasury bills? Hot money at best. So after 6 months or 90 days, 3 months, 186 months, they are leaving. They leave, and then again your economy gets distorted when they leave with their funds.
It's almost like you're going back to where you started from. But Prof, because of time, I want to try and tackle a lot of the issues from that particular briefing from the CBN governor. And one of the things he said was that, we're moving into the era of regulation. He was speaking the language of the regulator, sounding as though there were lapses in that area before now. And one of the things we have seen the CBN do in the recent days is to clamp down on bureau de change operators. They have now revoked the license of over 4,000 bureau de change operators. I think it's the cash reserve that will now be moved to as high as 500 million as well. Speak to us about the economics of this and the impact it will have overall on the foreign exchange rates.
Yes, I think it will have a salutary impact on the Forex markets. It's one reform, if you like. We have been clamoring, a lot of people have been clamoring. There's need to sanitize the BDC segment of the Forex market, and I'm happy the central bank has risen up to the challenge. It's all in a bid to sanitize that space. Okay, a situation in which you have as many as 6,000 bureau de change. Of course, even for purposes of supervision, there's no way it can be effective. So I'm happy to note that the central bank is moving in that direction, revoking the licenses of 4,173 BDCs. And if you read the circular was very clear, as to why the licenses were being revoked. A number of them, or these particular BDCs, were in breach of, one regulation or the other, particularly to do with transparency. That's why you hear a number of them, persistently failing to submit, render returns to the central bank as required. So I think it's moving in the right direction, including the attempt to reduce the number. I'm sure the next leg of it now will be to get them to recapitalize, get them to, ensure that, by the time they finish the M&A process, I expect the number of BDCs in the country to drop. And it dropped to a manageable size that the central bank can effectively oversight, and supervise. So I think it's a step in the right, direction. Yes, no doubt, a lot of lapses, before now, which the central bank, the new management is trying to, deal with. Yes, also including the case of when he talked about, being aggressive regulatory regime. I think I support that. Infractions and should be dealt with. The central bank should be able to, wield the hammer, sanction financial institutions that are in breach of regulation. So I think it's a step in the right direction.
Interesting you said that, Prof, because for the BDCs, for those whose licenses have been revoked, there are a lot of people who think that this is not going to enable any transparency in the process. That they say that, look, some of these illicit or illegal traders are enabled by politicians and some of these banks. I want you to react to that, and that because they believe that that's where it should start from, and not even necessarily the BDCs.
Yes, but again, there is a saying in economics, the classicals will tell you supply creates its own demand. When you have so many of them, of course, a lot of them become channels or avenues for illicit transactions, illicit flows, particularly when it's becoming difficult for the central bank to supervise them, in view of their unwieldy number. So by the time the number is reduced, central bank will now be in a position to supervise and also ensure that all the KYC, all the checks, due diligence, are done by these people, when dealing with, their clients or their customers. Which is why I said earlier on that I think I support this move, including even the recent, action on Binance. Okay, yes, I agree. There's need to have an environment where the cryptocurrencies are encouraged. But again, it's important too that the space somehow should also be regulated. So that it doesn't become abused. It doesn't also become channels for money laundering, channels for illicit transfer of currency. And particularly in the case of Binance, we, from what we read, the Office of National Security Advisor said it has evidence to show or to prove, including the central bank, that the platform, crypto platform was used for purposes of manipulating the Naira exchange rate and speculative activity. So to that extent, one would support, again, the current action by the government, with respect to Binance and also for the BDCs. So I think the signal is also is going out. All of these actions will help to bring sanity, transparency, and calm the market. While the central bank at the same time is also ensuring, which is what it is doing now, that the Forex backlogs, genuine Forex backlogs, are cleared in order to restore confidence in that market. Remember too that the central bank has started to sell Forex to BDCs. And you can't begin to sell Forex to BDCs when you have not controlled their number. So now that the central bank is trying to control their number, it will now make sense to say, okay, let's resume the sale of Forex to BDCs. And maybe for now, even though a lot of people will tell you that you don't find that happening in other countries. It's only Nigeria where central bank in the past had sold Forex to BDCs. But the way it is now, because we need to fix the supply side, we need to put liquidity in the market. I think it is justified if the central bank begins to also release some dollars, through the BDCs. But again, the first thing is the BDCs must be, the number must come down. There must be sanity in that space, which is what the central bank, has done and is doing.
Thank you, Prof. I will take a break now because I think you've already answered in that last response of yours. You've spoken to some of the issues, especially the Binance issue, which I was going to raise, and you've spoken to that as well. But I want to discuss another issue with you, which is your Oronsaye report and the impact it could also have on the economy. But we will take a break now, and we'll return. We'll have that conversation with Prof. Let's take a break.
Every second, every minute, every hour, and every day, time doesn't just tick away. It counts down to political decisions that shape our world.
This country must move.
Imagine the impact these decisions have on our lives. Some are consequential, others may leave us intrigued or baffled.
You will have no better friend and partner than Nigeria.
Step in and feel the frenzy like never before. Join me every weekday for an hour of fact-finding interviews where questions cut to the core. What does Tinubu have that other 17 candidates do not have? I will dig in to get to the heart of issues, from local politics to global insight. Join me as I unearth the power plays, jaw-dropping revelations and the unfiltered truth. This isn't just politics, it's unraveling the stories that matter. Brace yourself for Politics Tonight every weekday at 8 p.m, where every decision echoes along the corridors of our lives. Politics Tonight, only on TVC News.
Thanks for staying with us. Now, we've been talking about the economy and some of the decisions made by the CBN, and that's the MPC, Monetary Policy Committee, in the course of the week. We're speaking with a Professor of Finance and Capital Market at the Nasarawa State University, Uche Nwaleke. Now, we're going to turn to another conversation because during the FEC meeting this week, the announcement was made that the president has given the go-ahead for the implementation of the Oronsaye report. We will just get, now this brought about the question that what is the fuss about this report that seems to generate reactions from different quarters?
Now what that means is that a number of agencies, commissions, and some departments have actually been scrapped. Some have been merged, while others have been subsumed.
National Agency for Control of AIDS, HIV/AIDS, NACA, to be merged with the Center for Disease Control in the Federal Ministry of Health. National Emergency Management Agency to be merged with the National Commission for Refugee Migration and Internally Displaced Persons.
Now, just for quick context, in 2011, the administration of President Goodluck Jonathan set up the Presidential Committee on the Rationalization and Restructuring of the Federal Parastatals, Commissions and Agencies. The committee was headed by a retired federal civil servant and former head of service of the Federation, Stephen Oronsaye. The committee recommended scrapping and merging of 220 out of the then 541 statutory and non-statutory agencies. The 800-page report of the committee noted that the functions of most government parastatals and agencies are overlapping. The implementation involves merging, subsuming, and scrapping agencies with similar functions. The President has also constituted a committee that will work within a 12-week period to actualize this new directive. And still with me on the show is Professor of Finance and Capital Market at the Nasarawa State University, Uche Nwaleke. He joins us from Abuja studio. Prof, again, this is generating reactions. I want to also get your thought on that as well, and how this will address the loopholes and shortages that we've been talking about.
Well, it's understandable that it's generating reaction. The Oronsaye report is generating mixed reactions. As you rightly noted, this is something that has been on the shelf for a long time. I recall, just as you noted, 2011, 2012, the report was submitted. I think the white paper didn't come out until 2014. And another white paper too was submitted under the last, the immediate past regime in 2022. Okay, and for me, I think the decision to implement that Oronsaye report now is a welcome development. At least it speaks to the fact that now there's a political will, to implement it. Setting up an 8-member committee, giving them 12 weeks to work. The advice I have with respect to the time frame is that it is rather short. 12 weeks is rather short to, look into that document and with a view to implementing it. Maybe not not less than 1 year, should be given to that committee to work on that report. And that's because, again, that report has taken time. A lot of things have happened since then, which is also why you had some people saying it should be petitioned, that it has been overtaken by events, time and so on. But I don't think it should be. We should petition it, and that's because of the need to reduce the cost of governance, in Nigeria. When the president was constituting his cabinet, I thought, having as many as 48 ministers, was rather unwieldy, and it was going to have an effect, an impact on the cost of governance. Yes, the Constitution says every state must have a minister. Okay, so I was thinking maybe we could restrict it to just 37 ministers, maximum. And that also means that if we are reducing the number of ministries, some ministers may not really, have full ministries. But the important thing is to reduce. When you reduce the number of ministries, you're also reducing cost of governance, in the process. So the Oronsaye report, the decision to even implement, that I said, is a good one. It shows that the government, is demonstrating political will, to do something that previous regimes, couldn't do. But again, in doing that, it's important to understand that in the white paper that was released in 2014, the Oronsaye report identified 541 agencies, parastatals, and commissions, at the time. But as we speak today, we now have over 900 of them. Okay, so you can see that's one of the things why I said that there is a need for a committee to take time to actually review. So there may be need to also review.
And that's my question, Prof. Is that even as we're trying to address, or the government is trying to address this, what is to say that more agencies will not be created? Because it would seem as though every time there is a challenge in the country, we either set up a committee or we create an agency to handle it. As we speak, the National Assembly is looking to create development commissions for some regions in the country. That's also going to be tied into the cost of governance. So how do we ensure that more agencies are not created, even as we're looking to deal with this, or merge agencies?
Yes, but the important thing is, what is the rationale for the merger or the scrapping of some of these agencies? It is because of the discovery that a number of them, had overlapping functions. A number of them were simply doing the same thing. Okay, it will be difficult to say you are shutting the door on the establishment of agencies. If there is need to create an agency that will be doing something that hasn't been there before, of course that provides rationale. But the case of Oronsaye report was a case where you have agencies that were doing similar things, overlapping functions. Okay, and that was why that's those recommendations were made. But again, I was going to say that even if you decide to implement that Oronsaye paper, the white paper that was submitted in 2014, okay, it may not really have significant impact because over 70% of the recommendations by Oronsaye were rejected. I have looked at that white paper. That white paper contains 270 items. Out of the 270 items, virtually just a few of them were accepted by the government. Okay, most of them were either rejected or the government simply said noted. Okay, so that's why I said that there may be a need to also go to review. And the white paper too also made some recommendations that, of course, have been overtaken by events now. For example, if you look at the white paper, it talked about the Abuja Securities and Commodities Exchange. Today, we don't have anything called Abuja Commodities and Securities Exchange. So we have, the Nigerian Commodities Exchange, which replaced that. So that's the need for. That also means that there's a need for this committee to sit down and review the white paper with a view to also, considering some of the ones that were rejected, to see whether they still have merits, and the ones that the government noted. All right. For example, there was a recommendation to merge WAEC and with NECO. but the government rejected it. There was a recommendation to establish the National Commission for Tertiary Institutions. So merge National University Commission, merge the MBT, merge them with the National Commission for Colleges of Education. But again, government rejected. So government rejected a number of recommendations, including merging EFCC with the ICPC and the Code of Conduct Tribunal. It was recommended, but government also rejected. So, as I said, majority of the items there were rejected in the white paper. And that's why there's need for the committee to also take a look at them, take a look at that document again to see the ones that they can further recommend to the government for implementation. The way it is, the white paper, the way it is, just contains a few that were accepted, and even if you implement that, it may not really translate into something significant. And part of why I talked about having more time is also for the committee to also recommend what will happen to those that will eventually be disengaged, as a result of the merger, as a result of the, scrapping, so that it doesn't result to, create unemployment crisis. Those people must be accommodated one way or the other, not necessarily in the civil service, but something has to be done, to ensure that even when they leave, they are, productively engaged, in the economy.
But how some have talked about severance package, and others say, look, that is also going to be money gulping for the federal government. In what way can they be actively engaged without so much pressure on the finances of the government? Yes,
I've had a recommendation. I think one of the government officials was saying that assuring that people wouldn't lose their jobs, even with the implementation of the Oronsaye report. So what that would mean is that if you imagine everybody still stays, within the system. So, but if that happens, then the whole idea behind the report and its implementation, becomes defeated. What is the idea? The idea is to reduce the cost of governance, to reduce recurrent expenditure, to reduce personnel costs, to reduce overhead costs. Okay, because when you duplicate functions, that is the kind of thing you get. So what do you do to ensure that even when people leave, as I said, you don't throw them into the labor market? Is to have a plan. As I said, you have a 1-year plan, and within that 1-year plan, part of your plan will be first to communicate the need. There must be serious communication. Okay, let them understand why the government is doing what it is doing, why the agencies must be merged. Okay, and then the people that are there, those that will eventually, not be absorbed, will be trained. There should be a kind of training between now and the time
at least to completed for those people. Efficiency. Prof, I'm afraid we do have to
want some sort of training that will enable them to also survive outside the civil service when they leave.
Absolutely.
And possibly, of course, arrange for some sort of package, for those people as they leave, so that they can also use to start, something on their own.
Thank you, Prof, for your time. Very interesting contribution from you today. We'll be speaking with Professor of Capital Market, Finance and Capital Market at the Nasarawa State University, Uche Nwaleke. Thank you so much for your time.